Hello and welcome. A survey of just under 1,000 firms carried out by the Institute of Directors that was shared yesterday on BBC's website shows that 74% of firms interviewed plan on maintaining the increase in home working. More than half planned on reducing their long-term use of workplaces. A smaller survey of those same firms who had already cut workplace use suggested 44% of them thought working from home was actually proving more effective. For those of you who don't know me, I am Peter-Jan Grech, a fellow director of the Malta Business Network, the Malta chapter specifically, and the CEO and founder of Brandwagon, a Malta-based, yet might I say, remote-first branding agency. I've been working remotely since March 12th, though I'm actually hosting you from our studio in Hotjar, which is absolutely empty except for me, but I didn't want to risk being Zoom bombed by any one of my 3 kids and dog. With me today to share personal insights, business experiences, and to help us decide if remote working is actually here to stay are 3 very inspiring business leaders. Louise Theobald, Chief People Officer at Hero Gaming, David Darmanin, CEO and founder of Hotjar, a company that's actually been operating 100% remotely since inception, and Nikhil Patil, who's actually just joined us, who's the CEO of Go PLC. Mari, David, Nikhil, thank you for accepting our invitation, and thank you and a warm welcome to all our members and guests who have signed in to listen to today's webinar. So just to get warmed up, let's have a quick round of insight sharing around our panel, and starting with you, Mari, I warned you were going to be my first. How has COVID affected the way you work, and what have you experienced at Hero Gaming? But also on a personal level, how has changing the way we work affected you specifically?
Yes, so we have, COVID has affected us, of course, but even pre-COVID, we were to a certain extent working remotely. So we have an office in Sweden and an office in Malta. And pre-COVID, we had already started as well recruiting some people remotely. So I can't say we're totally and completely new to the aspect of remote working. And in fact, when we had decided to work from home, within a day we were set up and all working from home, and it worked quite smoothly. You know, we're a tech company, we had the tools in place, everybody had laptops, so that transition was quite swift, I would say. Everybody, and even to our surprise and to the surprise of the many skeptics that there were and who were always skeptical about allowing people to work from home, I would say that productivity levels actually increased. And my worry at the time was, are people stopping? You know, what time do they start? What time do they finish? I was very concerned about the parents who are trying to work from home with children around. You know, initially it was quite sweet to have children in calls, but by the time you could see that more for the parents themselves, their stress levels were really increasing. I mean, also, we have quite a large community of expats who live on their own, who live in studio apartments, who eat and sleep in the same place. And now they were also working from the same room, essentially. So at the time, we actually decided to never close the offices. We kept them open, and particularly for these people, we've kept them open. We've kept them open more from a mental health, to safeguard the mental health of these particular people in the organization. I would say all in all, a good 85% of our employees kept working from home. In summer, when the numbers went down, we saw an organic return to the office. People were coming in, let's say twice a week, and it worked out nicely because people wanted to see, they were craving for that human contact, I would say. And I'm glad we took the opportunity at the time, because then in August, when cases spiked again, people were back at home, more or less. Even though now we're seeing some return, we haven't told people to come into the office, but I'm here every day practically, because I am more productive from the office. I have kids at home, you know, and to me, and from my personal point of view, I feel that coming into the office is where I work best. Having said that, we've been extremely flexible. We haven't forced people to return. The people know that they can come here if they wish to, basically.
Yeah.
And that's it has worked very well for us. It actually, I think the way it worked, the way people collaborated, the way managers actually really made it a point to be in contact and keep that connection with their employees, not only with their teams but also cross-functionally. So there was a lot of effort being done by us as an HR team, by the leadership team. It worked very well, and it shows in our engagement scores, and it shows also in some other polls, remote working polls that we did along these 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really interesting point of view. Of course, we've been running similar polls with our own people, and we also have seen the ups and downs in the mode. And I think it is obviously a very, very personal thing. It also depends on, I suppose, each individual organization, but also each individual's circumstances. Nikhil, what about you? I know that you and your team were extremely agile in not only going remote, but also supporting many of your customers with the big switch. What's your experience? Nikhil, you're on mute. I think that statement, "you're on mute," is probably the most famous statement after the words "unprecedented," I think, in this phase of COVID.
Probably. So look, I think from our perspective, the challenges were a bit different. As you know, Go is a bit of a beast, for lack of a better word. But the reality is that at least 20 to 30% of our organization has to visit people's homes. So that creates a bigger challenge. So we have technicians who go to businesses, and so we had to be ultra secure and safe that we protect the technicians, but protect our customers too. And strangely enough, I was on a flight back from Dubai in February when I met somebody from Hong Kong, and I could see it coming. So we basically prepared ourselves in February. So we have been remote only since March. We basically bought everybody laptops, upgraded everybody's connection, and then actually did a dry run before the lockdowns happened for a week. And I think when you work, it is depending on which function you work in. If you're a techie, if you're in marketing, it's probably easier to work remotely. But we had a lot of people who are actually doing physical work. And as Marie-Louise rightly said, many of them live in smaller places. So it becomes difficult to actually work from the same place you. So we had to, accommodate for that. So essentially, simple rule, we try to make sure that the frontliners are always protected. That was number one. So everybody went remote, primarily not only to try remote working, but also to make sure that we segregate technicians, frontliners, so customers are protected. Second thing, upgraded everybody's equipment so home office, internet, because to comfort. And we have continued that way all the way till July, August, and even today. Actually, we finally made a decision that it's a big shift for Go. Means Marie-Louise used to work at Go, so she understands when I say this. We have decided to be a remote-first organization. So what that means is, actually, the rule is you cannot come to work more than 3 days, or you cannot come to the same location more than 3 days. So we are being very prescriptive for us. But it's not just you work from home for the rest of the 2 days. So what we are now doing is that we are essentially looking at satellite offices that we rent throughout the island. So we have B2B sales who have to be somewhere between meetings, but you don't have to come to Marsa every time. If you're in Melilla or St. Paul's Bay, we'll have a small Regis office, for example. But the mindset is definitely remote first. So we have opened up, means I'm in the office today. We have 810 people, but there are literally only 70 people in the office.
Oh, wow. That's quite impressive, yeah.
And productivity hasn't slowed down. I think from a productivity, connectivity perspective, it has been quite interesting. What's more interesting is now when I have teams in person, they feel very inefficient. So I had my weekly meeting today. Management meeting for the last 5 months has been starting on the dot. Today it's like we came in, we had coffee for 20 minutes, we spoke for another 10 minutes, and the meeting was half hour late, which is good, but then you realize it's not very efficient. I'll stop there.
Well, I think efficiency and intimacy are two very, very big debatable questions and concepts. And just before we start getting into more details, I'm just going to go in and ask our remote working guru, David Darmanin, who's I mean, you've been viewing this, in my opinion, as an observer. You know, you've been testing the waters on this for quite some time, David. And funny enough, as I was doing the research to prepare for today's webinar, every fifth or sixth, article out there which is talking about remote working somehow or other either quotes or links back to Hotjar. So, you know, how have you seen it? And obviously, what were your big decisions in going remote way back in 2014, even though you had been remote since 2012? And, how have you seen all this? Like, everybody's catching up kind of with where you have been for the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I made my bet on remote actually in 2012. So I was working in a software company here locally, and it was very challenging to hire and build the team we wanted to with specialists, especially in my space, which was growth, hacking, and conversion rate optimization. It's very difficult and very frustrating to me. And I remember in 2012, early in the year, I remember telling my wife, you know what, like, I want to try remote, let's travel, let's have more freedom. I'm not typically a pioneer type of person, so this is probably the only time I can say I kind of did something ahead of the curve. But that experience for me, being in actually then a British consultancy firm that were doing remote and they were operationally excellent, was an amazing experience for me then to make a bet in 2014 to have Hotjar be a completely remote business. So we're talking 5 co-founders here in Malta, 2 of which are Swedish, living kilometers away from each other, but we were all wearing headsets because we wanted, when new people joined us, they wouldn't feel outside of our culture, right? And since then, it's evolved a lot. And for us, actually, it's something I like a lot. I say a lot at events, especially when I'm speaking. I typically speak about stuff related to Hotjar, but I always get questions about remote instead, which is interesting. And I always like to say remote is more of the output, right? Remote is, we end up being remote. But for us, the bet was not to be remote, which is an output, right? That's like saying with the business, we bet on being profitable, right? Like, that doesn't make sense. So for us, it's about being distributed, right? So the way that the business operates is not just where we're located. Now, for us, the benefit of doing that is that we could hire specialists, right? Exactly the right people we wanted from anywhere in the world. And we don't do it randomly, right? So we're now over 130 people. We've got product engineering in the European time zone, customer-facing roles across the globe. So there is some logic to it. But for us, distributed goes beyond just the location, right? So for us, it's also about how we distribute ownership, how we distribute budgets and allowances, right? We want people to be as much as possible self-serve and self-driven. So even though every call I've had in the last 6 months, everyone tells me, yeah, COVID didn't affect you at all, right? You were prepared for this. It actually did, because part of the way we operate is, first off, a lot of our team members thought the same thing. They're like, yeah, COVID, like, it's not going to affect us much. So actually, one big thing for us was to say, listen, get prepared, get ready. Things are going to change. You're going to be locked at home. And these people are used to operating in a certain way. More importantly, even though we don't have an office, we have a system where we still have it, but we can't use it, where we have an allowance for each team member. So instead of investing in an office, every team member has a budget where they can spend that to go and meet other team members, right? They can go to, we found that actually in an internal poll, people prefer to go to a cafe than to actually a co-working space. So we have everyone has a credit card they can use to go to a cafe. We'll cover their coffees and stuff while they're using their Wi-Fi. So all of these things fell apart, right? These simple kind of informal structures were no longer there. Also, our twice-a-year meetups events that we do where we regroup together, these were lost. So what we found for us was actually we had to go deeper into distributed. Right now, how do we do this completely right remote? There is now no longer any. So even us, it affected us, let alone other businesses, right? So our solution to that was we've now redefined meetups to gatherings, right? Where we had the ability for people to meet and exchange in person. We've again gone even deeper into that digitally. So yeah, we've still had some challenges, but definitely there's been benefit for us to be kind of prepared for this.
Oh, fantastic. And yes, I mean, as in discussions with our own leadership teams, many a time have we asked ourselves, how do we work on, employee engagement? How do we make sure that our guys are okay? How do we make sure that everybody's still motivated? And how do we also, contribute to making sure that we're nurturing the right sort of culture as the organization changes in a world that we weren't ready for? And I think that is one of the big things. Before we jump into that, which I think is something I really want to sort of get around, I want to focus a bit on productivity. Okay, so kind of we've all been chucked into this experiment, where some of us by wish and some of us by force, in testing, will our organizations be as productive? Will they be as efficient? Will they be as effective, as the past? I believe that our organization has actually become way more efficient and definitely more effective. And I think, and I agree with what Nikhil said, I'm not the guy waiting for people to walk into my room after, waiting for them to finish off their coffee in the canteen. So that has made me much more of a, excited, looking forward to the next meeting to start kind of guy. Having said that, it has made things harder. What have you guys seen? Mari, I'm going to start with you. Like, how can you are you measuring the effectiveness of your teams, and what are your managers reporting back, and what are you seeing?
Yes, so actually, it's really interesting that David said that this whole COVID situation affected them, because when discussing this subject internally, I always go back to the fact that this is not even a normal situation for a fully remote company, where one doesn't even have the opportunity to meet a team member. So I'm pretty sure that it affected you also in some way. When it comes to productivity, yes, we have a lot of tools that measure productivity. We used to use one collaboration and productivity tool, and we're in the process of implementing a new one. But we have the right technology in place to make sure that we are measuring productivity, and there has been an increase in productivity. Yes, we have become more efficient, but at what cost? This is the question. Yeah. I keep asking myself. Did we meet all our deadlines? Yes, we did. Did we deliver everything we had to deliver? Yes, we did. People are more efficient because they're not commuting. People have no distractions. They have no little chit chats in the office. Yes, granted, but we've been encouraging people to get themselves into a routine, and without wanting to, when you're at home, it's very difficult to have a start-off point and a cut-off point. I think that's, I've experienced it personally myself, and that is the risk. And because of everything that is happening with COVID, I think the lack of social interaction, so people aren't really distracted with, okay, I can go out and meet my friends, and I have that party, and I have a hangover maybe, the day after. They're not really experiencing that. But I believe it's coming at a cost, and we have a responsibility to look into that. It's not just a matter of saying, yes, we're more productive, or yes, we're more efficient. We need to understand in the long run, the long-term effects that this situation is having on our teams and on our people.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I think it's interesting, the fact that we can measure productivity and we can measure effectiveness, but I found myself many a time throughout this whole the last 6 months. So how do I measure my effectiveness as a leader? Before I could measure the effectiveness also, in terms of the human interactions, in terms of the interactions I could have with my team. How are we measuring leadership in a very different way today? And I think as the whole world comes to a kind of a handbrake turn halt in talking about sustainability, I think this is a really important question that we should be asking ourselves. It's not a matter of productivity, but productivity at what cost? Nikhil, I'm just going to jump that over to you. I mean, it's been a tough time for business anyway. It's been a tough time for businesses all over. Many a business have been suffering, some others haven't. But, how can you what have you guys been doing in terms of, trying to help people improve the way they're functioning on a sustainable level as well? If there's any insight you could share with us.
Yeah, so I think, look, this journey, I mean, COVID came at a coincidence, but this journey started for us anyway before that. We have been internally, what we realized that, half the work that people do is sometimes, you lose, especially in a large organization, you miss out on why you do the work you do. If you are passing a cable to the ground, or I don't know, if you're even digging a ditch at Go, which many people do, you just think you're digging a ditch. So we flipped that around since last year, and we have oriented ourselves around trying to figure out what our purpose is. Why does Go exist? We tried to do it bottom up, and finally we did go through that exercise. We involved all 810 people in coming up with it, and we are moving towards trying to being a purpose-led organization where we try to connect every job to what it means to work at Go. That essentially, and luckily enough, the journey started 6 months before we got to COVID. So actually connecting people's work, whether they do it from office or whether they do it from a boat or their home or a cafe, and knowing why they're doing it is making a huge difference in how people engage with work. That was one. Second is we think about work in two aspects. There's transactional work. If you're filing accounts, if you're writing accounts, you're just doing accounts. But if you're coming up with a marketing campaign, I'm not saying one is less creative than the other, but there are certain types of work which is just transactional, and that can be measured. I am less for measuring work because, I think I believe in giving people the context and letting them get on with work. That's how I think about it. So for us, we have all the data to measure tools. What's got lost in the process, I used to be a developer in my past life. So I remember the best moments were when I was with like 6 people, 2 o'clock in the night, really working through a problem. And it sparks a level of creativity, which comes up with new solutions and new ideas. We haven't really cracked that piece. Like we haven't really, because this is all very new for us. Feels like we've been doing this all the time. It's only been 5 months. So we haven't really cracked the piece as to how do you get people virtually together to actually, just free form, be together to solve knotty issues or come up with ideas, which is different than saying, okay, I'm sitting at a till doing a sale. And I think that's the challenge. I think the answer lies somewhere between. That's why the push towards remote first, where we want people to come together to work together, not just to sit next to each other and do their work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've just answered the question that has just come up on the Q&A, and might I remind everybody listening in that there is a Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom call. If anybody has any questions, they can chuck them in over there. Richard Cherry said, the success or not of teleworking really depends on the true motivation and job satisfaction of the team. Do you agree with this? I think we all seem to have agreed with this in the way we, you've just spoken, I think, clearly, purpose-led organizations clearly have a direct impact on job satisfaction and clearly on motivation. Having said that, I think that is it's great to talk about purpose-led businesses and purpose-led brands, and I think it's really important that we all feel connected to why we're doing what we're doing. Having said that, what can we do as leaders to help motivate teams, in these specific circumstances when you can't just pull somebody inside and say, hey, let's just go for a quick coffee and a chat and see how things are on a personal level. I mean, at Bandwagon, we've done a number of things, but I'd be very, very keen to hear, David, in your case, there's some employees which you hardly ever meet except in those 2 meetups a year and on your stand-ups. I know you have a specific name for your stand-ups. I'd be keen for you to share that as well with everybody. But what do you do to help, keep your team close and motivated?
Yeah, I tend to speak a lot about this, especially when we're hiring for leadership roles, because let's face it, up till a year ago, there weren't many people with remote experience, right? And a lot of them have this question, can I be effective as a leader? Will this be a good thing or a bad thing for my career? I'm glad I don't need to deal with that question that much anymore going forward. But it's an interesting question. And my answer to that is, I think it's all about being intentional. And I think it's a positive thing, which is if we strip away everything, right? If we strip away these events and the breakfasts and these events and take away all the, I'm going to avoid using a certain word, right? And just go to the core of it, right? What is it that really matters? And the way I think about it, especially as Hotjar is still small, right? So I don't have all the answers, but as we're growing, what we found is that there's two things. One, as a leader, you need to rethink completely how you are effective as a leader, and you can no longer rely on chance, right, or on serendipity. And instead, you now need to have a more programmatic approach to leadership, right? Which is, how many reports do I have? How many second-degree reports? How am I going to meet with them, right? So we have something at Hotjar. We have something called Donut Time, which is an app you can put in Slack, which randomly matches up people. We have all hands meetings where we group people together and they can ask questions. But then it's also just being a good manager in terms of actually knowing who's in a good place, who maybe needs a little bit more time to talk. And we still have these Zoom calls. I still like to say, hey, shall we have a chat? I just noticed you're like something weird in the way maybe you were not weird, but maybe you're not your usual self. Like, these things are still there and they shouldn't be replaced. So yeah, I think it's all about just being a little bit more programmatic is maybe not the right word, but thinking more a little bit planning wise how you want to work on this. And I think you'll be, or at least most leaders we've recruited have found themselves to be yet again more effective once they operate this way. But it does take getting used to.
Yeah, and I think getting used to this is interesting, that before we had very, very clear lines between what was work and what was personal. I think Mari touched upon this a couple of minutes ago. I know that for a fact I became the head of IT at my household the minute, all my kids at school went on to Teams meetings for their classes. And I think there's been a whole sort of, tough time for those people. I'm lucky, with the fact that we share the kids' responsibilities, at home. And when I say we share, my wife takes pretty much 100% care of the kids whilst I'm at work. And so it was much easier for me to take care of business, and she could take care of the kids. But there's many, many examples in many real life situations where, people with kids, with vulnerable family, or vulnerable situations couldn't just deal with it with like some of the rest of us could. So, this, we do have to understand, that the whole basis of how we move forward with businesses is also dependent on our personal lives as well. Mari, I know that you have obviously had your own, ways of dealing with this, but obviously you also have your own employees and your own team, who've obviously shared a lot of your experiences. Rather than how we've done it in the past, what do you see as a solution going forward?
So first of all, some people might not agree with me on this, but I don't think that leadership is any different, be it remote or in the office. Back in May, we actually did a remote leadership training program for our managers, but more to give them the confidence that, you have the tools. This is the knowledge on top of the knowledge that you already have. And now we're giving you the confidence to do this remotely too. But in reality, essentially, it's not much. There isn't much of a difference between remote leadership or leadership in person. I think COVID has really tested. I think that we really need a leadership going forward, which is empathic and compassionate. And I know I represent, the people, and I'm very close to what the people feel, and I'm an avid believer in sort of being close to the people. But I think COVID has taught us that. And going forward, that is something that I feel that leaders, if they don't have empathy or compassion, I think they will struggle to succeed in managing their teams.
Mm-hmm. But on a practical level, have you seen any sort of new examples of how you deal with, working from home with kids at home? And all this. I mean, is there any specific sort of insight you could share with us? What are the,
as a parent or as a...
let's take it as a parent. I mean, let's take that as experience as a parent first.
So as a parent, I must say my patience was tested. And as a parent, it is a very big struggle, because on one hand, you have to do your job. On another hand, you know, you're a mother, you're a father, you don't want your children to feel that they're being ignored. So it's a struggle. I do believe that, you know, as parents, you do kind of acquire that multi-skilling, multitasking skill. So obviously that helps, and that comes in handy. But it is a very big challenge as a parent to work from home when the children are there, because working from home when the children are at school is a completely different story, obviously. But it is very, very challenging. And I think as businesses and as employers, we have some sort of responsibility to make sure that we are being understanding of these people, we are being flexible to a certain extent, and we are helping these people to make the necessary arrangements, that because at the end of the day, the work needs to get done. That's quite clear. And there are certain core hours where we need to communicate with one another. So yes, it is the responsibility of the parent, but it is also the responsibility of the employer to help the employee find that balance.
Yeah. Nikhil, I don't know if you have anything to share. I think empathy was the big keyword there, which for me is obviously, you know, a big driver in terms of problem solving and finding the right way to deal with this. Nikhil, how do you see it from your end? I mean, 800 employees is a lot of issues to deal with.
Yeah, but I'm totally on board with what just Marie-Louise said. I think leadership doesn't change whether you're doing it remotely or whether you're in person. In fact, I would say that being remote even further, how should I brings focus on your leadership style. Because, you know, for me, leadership style or leadership comes down to three things, right? One is you set the context. You let people empower themselves. You empower people itself doesn't symbolize empowerment to me. You let people empower themselves. And third is you give feedback. So you basically, if you can do these three things, whether you're doing it remotely or not, so everybody knows what they're working on, everybody knows how they're getting on, you know how they're getting on. I think that's basically the nugget of leadership. And I don't think that changes whether I'm doing it whether I'm remote or in person.
Agreed. Okay, now let's take a bit of a different, you know, angle for this conversation, rather than just focus on sort of, you know, the way we're dealing with our teams, the way we're also dealing with our businesses. Remote working has had a huge impact on the way we deal with our customers as well. And obviously that has changed a lot in the way and where we work from, but also has impacted, you know, very, very simple things like signing off documents. Do we still need to be signing off documents and having, you know, wet ink on paper? And I think, Nikhil, I'm going to put this back onto you, because obviously, you know, signing up to a Go account used to be a lot of paperwork, and I don't think it still is. How has that changed, and how has that led to innovation?
So I think that is the place where we have achieved quite a few changes in the last 5 months. So essentially, you're absolutely right. Till about 8 months ago, you would still sign documents, customers. Now, actually, essentially, we don't sign any documents throughout the organization. In fact, we did something like DocuSign or Scribe to sign everything. There's no argument. Before, there was always a resistance. No, but the customer likes a contract now. It doesn't change. The second big thing has happened is communication. So previously, when we would do a product launch, it would be amazing. Like 1 year would go by and half the organization wouldn't know that a product has been launched or what it is. Today, what we do is, one is every Friday we have a live event where the entire executive team gets on video just like that. You talk about something, you invite somebody to talk about the business, and then you have a 45-minute Q&A. We do that every Friday. And secondly, all product launches happen online. So from day one, about not 800, but 600 employees know what the product is. Recently, we launched Wi-Fi Mesh. We had a Travelers concert first on screen. And so when I walk around after that week, there is no excuse for you not to know the product. And then when you think about it and you think, I had Teams 2 years ago. Why didn't I do this from the first place? Because before it used to be hire a space, bring muffins. People would spend time eating muffins more than understanding the product. And, it's a big party, but you don't really understand the product. You don't ask questions. Now it's like 1 hour, we launch the product, tell you what it is, what's the pricing, and give you half an hour to ask questions. So that has been a big change for us. So for us, I think as a company, we are definitely on the path to digitizing more and more as it goes.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think this has definitely been a big catalyst for positive change as well for a number of a number of instances. At Brandwagon, we've never seen more entrepreneurs come up with new ideas of new businesses, new projects, new technology, ideas which are bound to solve a lot of sort of new world problems, if you wish. And we're excited to see this. David, have you seen a lot of change in the way people are using? So now here's your time to plug in Hotjar and not just talk about remote working, but obviously you have eyes all over the place. What innovation are you seeing, and what are you mostly excited about in the way we have changed the way we work, which is affecting the way we live?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the real answer is I don't know, right? So I do speak to a lot of people, and I think we're in the phase, like we're just coming out of the panic phase, and everyone's finding themselves and everyone's developing systems, you know what I mean? So I think it's still early. What I'm excited to see is in 6 months' time, in a year, where we'll end up. And I think the most, because we talked about keywords and like main elements, I think the big part of it is going to be which organizations actually miss or hit probably what I consider to be the most important thing when it comes to distributed organizations, and that's trust. To me, and this sounds weird, but for us, like, we think so much about this, and we think it's probably the most important thing for us in terms of being successful and having a distributed culture. So it's this idea of you default to trust. And I think this is probably the thing that worries me the most, having spoken to other CEOs and organizations, is there's a little bit of this widespread culture of, okay, we're switching remote, so let's monitor. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's probably the fastest way to killing your culture. I'm not saying you shouldn't monitor anything, but the default should be trust. The default should be to welcome someone new as if they walked into an office, and that feeling of, here are your new colleagues, and here's your onboarding, here's a credit card to buy your stuff, or a budget to allow. How do we create that feeling of belonging and trust that we have at the office? Because it has nothing to do with office and non-office. How do we create a sense of belonging and trust? And if we don't have that, I think an organization can easily infiltrate itself with this feeling of doubt and kind of checking each other and mistrust. And I think that's a culture killer. So I think over the next 6 months, 1 year, I'm going to be interested to see how organizations are going to interpret this.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid.
And on the, if I had to add on David's point, I mean, trust, you don't get trust when you start working remotely. You know, trust is an important element that you build over time, obviously, and it's cultured, right? So I think if there isn't trust, and then you go to remote and you say, okay, let's start to trust, it's very challenging to actually get there. You know, my thoughts there would definitely be work on building the culture, work on making the culture sustainable, regardless of, you know, the situation as it is right now, whether the company is remote or not. But it's a really tricky one, because essentially it's very hard to say in practical terms, okay, how do you build trust? You know, trust is such a, in a way, it's a bit of a vague word, because trust is built by time, and you have different personalities to learn how to trust. But it's such an important point, for sure, that's David.
I'll interject just a little bit, because it's a very good question that you raised, that we asked ourselves for a couple of years. And we found that actually the key part of trust is transparency. So we as a business are transparent with everyone in the team, and we expect the same from them, right? So it's this understanding of, you're not well, or you're just in a bad place, tell us, tell your team, let's talk about it, right? Don't hide. And you know, it's these small things. Obviously, we could spend an hour just discussing this topic, but yeah, transparency. In fact, one of our values is build trust with transparency. So to us, that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's a really fundamental point, and I'm glad you brought it up and shared this. I think in terms of culture, I don't think we can build cultures. I think we can just nurture cultures. I think as leaders we can we can put in the seeds, but we need to nurture it along with our own team players and let our colleagues sort of join in that whole sort of culture building, and that is how trust is built. And I think the organizations who had trust built into their organization, I think, were the organizations that have been successful. And I think that has made a massive difference. Jumping onto the economics, and obviously there has been a lot of positive growth and positive reinventions, I think, with remote working. And I think we're going to see a massive revolution that's still to come in the way work is being done. And more than just that, the other organizations and other economies which are kind of subsections of the way the economy turns around and revolves. And so I think if we had to ask ourselves the question of, okay, what else is going to be affected? Well, yesterday I just called my landlord to let him know that we're letting go of our penthouse, because from 450 square meters, we've only used, I think about 6 people have come in since July over, and there's absolutely no point in paying rent for an extra floor. And if we are going to be changing the way we work, that's going to be affecting not only obviously real estate in general, but also the amount of maybe cafes and bars which are located close by. That's also going to be probably affecting the amount of work lunches and probably the amount of trousers that people like Vortex are going to be selling from now on, because everybody's just wearing shirts and shorts underneath. So how has that affected? And I mean, Nikhil, from a financial perspective, I know you're quite you've got quite an eye on the ball over here. How are you saying that this is going to affect also real estate in general, and how is that going to maybe be the right catalyst to change the way we're looking at real estate right now?
Well, I think when you work, you're always striking a balance between multiple stakeholders, right? At a business, you're trying to look after employees, capital investment, shareholders, customers. Means remote first or remote working is one of those things which actually allows you to satisfy many of them. So what do I mean? I write to employees once in a while or on a regular basis, and one of the things I said is, like, if you work remotely, you're likely to save 5,000 to 6,000 euros a year in terms of fuel costs, driving, but more importantly, you will save at least 3 weeks of your time, which has, and plus on top of that, you have less stress, less commute, so health, environment, which is priceless. So from an employee perspective, there's a saving. From our perspective, when I just look at it ourselves, there are two things that have happened. We definitely will cut our real estate costs by 20 to 25%. Doesn't mean we are saving all that money completely. We are looking at reinvesting. What that means is we'll probably have remote locations. So we will actually, I'm sure you heard of WeWorks. So we would probably rent from remote offices around the islands, because the reality is that in Malta, a lot of our employees can't work from home over a sustained period of time. They just need a place. They just don't need to come to HQ. So I think remote working could benefit. But definitely I can see that there might be an impact on real estate if a lot of people choose to do that. Now, what happens in Malta is that you have two types of real estate. Before we started building really nice office towers, more than 50% of real estate in Malta is less than 500 square meter offices, just like the penthouse you have is not part of a large complex. And if you look at what's happened in the last 5 years, we have been building a lot of grade A offices. So I think in the future, there are three things could happen. One is we go back to working the way it is. As Go, we won't, because it's a meaningful saving for us, but others could. But if that doesn't happen, one of the two things that's going to happen. Either some offices are going to stay empty, or rents are going to drop, because what will happen is that places like Mrihel, where you have very good office infrastructure, new towers coming up, last year the rent was probably 300, 400 a year. But now those guys are going to compete with your penthouse. So, so the question is that one way or the other, the good news is that all of us are going to have access to great real estate at a reasonable price if people don't go back to work. The not so good news is that probably means that we will have to repurpose a lot of other office space, which may not be grade A or with great infrastructure, for other purposes. put it bluntly.
Yeah, definitely a valid point. And again, there's also another opportunity in terms of where we hire. A question has just come in from somebody who's in LA who is a big fan of your cap, David, and has asked us a very important question, which is one of the questions I was going to put out there before. Is now that we are looking all over, for people to join our organizations, and obviously this gives a huge opportunity to people who are based here to be looking for other and new careers outside of effectively their own jurisdiction. How is that going to change? And built in with that question, Dave, I want to chuck this on to you. How do we deal with two things? How do we train new recruits who come in from a completely distributed working structure? And B, how do we deal with the legislation and where do we pay their taxes?
Can we skip the legislation part? No, I'm joking.
Well, I remember you were a lawyer, no? Before you got into software.
Yeah, but that didn't last long, so maybe that's a good reason for me to answer the question. No, the reality is you need to think outside the box, right? And obviously, now I'm going to talk from a context of a software company selling internationally. We were from day one wanted to be a global software company, right? So SaaS doesn't apply to other businesses, but we have a great opportunity here in our case to be a little bit more open to opportunities and to think different, right? There's literally no reason for us to have any physical presence anywhere, right? Because we were bold enough to do it. Some of our competitors have relied on that, right? So look, I guess let's start from an onboarding point of view. Again, I think it's all about being deliberate, organized. Operations and process, not for the sake of it, are going to become even more and more important now, right? Like you mentioned the fact that we used to be close to an office and the bars and restaurants would go eat from there, right? The shift, it's interesting to think, what is this going to do to Bolt deliveries, right? And shopping and orders. And when you think about that, again, process and structure is so important, right? Like you're now moving from literally walking into a place where a chef cooks something in the kitchen, puts it in front of you, to now having a whole supply chain system and everything to achieve the same thing. So we need to think about our businesses being impacted in the same way. So at Hotjar, we literally have an ops team that oversee the onboarding process and the tools and structures and all these things, right? So the moment someone applies for a role at Hotjar, they enter this system that we have, right? Which is already preparing itself for the likelihood that they would be onboarded, just as you would if you were selling something. So I used to say, and I can't say it anymore, that our hiring and onboarding processes and resources were much more structured and developed than our sales systems and whatnot, because we invested into that first. So the way we do it, though, from a human point of view, it's literally, there's a team responsible for the onboarding that is outsourced and works with other departments when it comes to product training and whatnot. There's systems that we use that someone owns and is rated in terms of its efficiency and how good they are in terms of experience. So what are our users saying, right? So again, it's like you're literally making your company into a product, right? And imagine that onboarding is now a service, and you're thinking it literally about it in that way. That's how we do it. In terms of legislation and whatnot, look, I don't know if I should be on a webinar being recorded and saying what we've done in the past, but again, as a software company with global aspirations and looking for opportunities, the approach that we've taken, and sometimes it is a little bit gray zone, is that we've started by engaging people as contractors, and obviously we'd have legal firms in those countries. Over time, as we've developed bubbles, like of groups where we have more people in one country working for us as contractors, we've shifted over to employment. So Hotjar now employs, for example, in the UK and in Germany. And now we're looking to do that in another 2 countries. So where we have now 4 or 5 contractors, we say, okay, let's switch over to that. But the reality is, again, you need to invest in operations which involves legal as well very early on. You need to have those structures in place, and to engage firms abroad that can help you and guide you in this. All I would say is it's a tricky kind of balance between, you can't go literally by the letter and everything, and because that would be too big of an investment up front. So I think you need the right type of legal help, which is pragmatic. So you're not breaking any laws, but you're finding ways to learn and know where you should invest as you grow.
Mm-hmm. And I think that gives rise to a really interesting conversation: is what is the role of legislation? What is the role of government should be playing in this? I think now that remote working is a reality, and it's a reality that is going to stay, then we need to start considering how we engage and how we change legislation in order to not only guide but also support people working in different places. Mari, from an HR perspective, I don't know if you have anything to comment, because you're obviously much more directly related into this. And have you seen maybe some of your employees who were working based here but went back home throughout lockdown and maybe have stayed or are considering staying?
So we had requests pre-COVID of key people, really good employees who wanted to go back home, and we agreed to keep them on. And we set up in a similar way to the way they described. He's to get in touch with David, actually, so it's handy to have him here as well to understand how they do it. But we've worked with tax consultants, because there's so much complication about, as to where they're going to pay the tax, where they're going to pay social benefits, and so on and so forth. We're now exploring a new tool solely and specifically for remote workers, which offers various different options as to how we can actually engage remote workers all over the world if we want to. I personally think that at a national level, and more importantly at an EU level, I think there has to be some leniency when it comes to remote workers. As such, I don't believe that there is any law that allows this. There are complicated tax laws that go around it, as far as I have been informed by tax consultants. So it can get very complicated for the employee who is in another country. So I think at an EU level, it is something that needs to be addressed, because even more so, we're going to find ourselves in situations where we're onboarding people permanently remote from the start. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so we're getting very, very close to the ending of this webinar. It's been extremely exciting. There are a couple of questions which are still open on our Q&A board, and I encourage anybody who still has some questions which they want to put over there, or comments in general, to just go ahead and see if in the next sort of 7 minutes we might be able to answer you. I'd like to attack one of the main questions here, which came at the very beginning of this conversation, which was, should a business help fund the home office or workplaces setup? What is your feedback? And I know for sure that there are a number of your employees listening in, so just mark what you say today.
Oh no, absolutely. I think it goes without saying. Look, I think ultimately long-term success of the business depends on its people. Right, so I'm definitely not making them dig for gold under a mine in some godforsaken place. So I want to make sure my employees are in the best shape of their lives, their mental well-being, physical well-being. So the last thing we want to do is push them at home and not cater for a working environment. It's a one-time cost per employee, but it's totally worth it. I think it signals your intent. If you want remote first or remote working to be successful, you got to go all the way, and investing and helping people with home office budgets, infrastructure is part of the journey.
David, what do you think?
Well, we do it. So yeah.
I know you have a very, very attractive onboarding sort of budget now that you give to your employees. I don't know if you're willing to share that with us, and maybe we can take some ideas from there.
Yeah, so we give a few thousand euros that covers your IT setup, which covers also setting up a home office. Then we have monthly allowances and yearly allowance that cover things like wellness budget. So that's for if you maybe want to use stuff like BetterHelp or mindfulness apps and whatnot. We have a working space budget so that you can cover your coffees, your stuff that you need at your home office. And then we have quite a few things. We have a working together budget, which is our office budget, right? So that's so you can travel and meet each other. We have vacation budget. So for us, these were all no-brainers, because when we thought again about, as a software company, every person that we hire is a key component in what we're building here. And when you factor in this cost and how it's used and the benefit of it, it's huge, right? So the feedback we typically get from team members is also, I'm doing things since I've worked at Hotjar that I would have never done before, because I would have never thought of investing into these things myself. Also, stupid example, you have a personal development budget, right, every year. This is literally, go learn whatever you want. No one's going to interfere. Maybe it's your career, or maybe you want to learn a new language, right? So it again goes back to this trust and freedom that we talked about before, that we know that they're going to do well with the resources that we give them, and it's repaid.
Yeah, and it goes back down to the big concept of trust, and also to the big concept of being a very good purpose-led organization. Mari, how do you see this?
I do see it in a bit of a different light to Nikhil and to David. So with us, when we're looking at our future, we will be taking more of a hybrid approach. So the office still remains an important space for us, but we will give our employees the flexibility of either coming to the office every day, or if they want to come in twice, 3 times a week, the flexibility is theirs. I will not say now that I will not give them, Wi-Fi as a benefit in that case. And I do see going forward now, as I start to plan my HR budgets for 2021, I'm seeing a redistribution in costs. As such, I don't see any major cost savings. I just feel that the expenses will be distributed in a different way. Yeah. But for us, the office will remain an important place where we meet and where we collaborate and where we continue to build our team. We do, a lot of the good habits we've adopted throughout these 6 months, and even before that, we will continue doing, like the check-ins, the regular all-hands meetings that we do. So we will keep that, but we are also quite fond of the office that we've invested in. We're not that many employees, we don't employ 1,000 employees. So the space as such will not make a huge difference. But our strategy is not to be solely remote first. We're not imposing that on our people. Our strategy is more to offer the flexibility to people, and we're doing this because this is what most of them want as well. This is the decision we took after listening to what people want in our organization. This is what works for us, basically.
Thank you, Mari. And I think I'm just going to share one last thing, and then I want to ask one final question to each of you guys. In July, we ran a survey with our own employees, asking them what do they think, and do they want to go back to the office, and would they be keen to? And I think the larger percentage, I think, possibly 6 people, one of them, which was myself, said that they would like to go back to the office at some point in time on a very flexible but remote availability way of life. I do believe that remote working in some way or other, call it a distributed working platform, I like the way David put it down there, thanks Dave, I'm going to be stealing that, is definitely here to stay. And so my final question to you guys is, what do you think? Is remote working here to stay? Nikhil?
At least for us. I cannot answer, but I think for us, in some shape or form, we're not going back.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, for us, excuse me?
Do you want my penthouse?
No, thank you.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I've personally adopted own less things to take care in general. So distributed remote, whatever we call it, works really well with that. Look, I think we always felt this was the future. We had no idea just how quickly this was going to happen. To Nikhil's point, it's not about everything and everyone, right? In our opinion, B2B software technology. In our opinion, it's a no-brainer. I think we've just gone from 20 kilometers an hour, we've just shifted gear and we've gone to 100 kilometers an hour. So I don't think it was ever a debate of whether it's here to stay or not. I think now it's a question of whether we're just going to stay at this pace. And I think we will.
Okay, thank you, David. Mari.
So for us, as I said initially, we've always worked to a certain extent remotely, but between offices, obviously. In our case, we will not impose remote first, but it will be an option for our employees. So we will see more of it. I have had managers of some teams in the past, being skeptical about allowing people to work from home when the rest of the organization had quite a lot of flexibility. But now at least I have them on board too. But for us, it's about giving the flexibility. I think it's a nice option. It's a fantastic option to have. And that is our approach. We will continue to give it to our people.
Thank you, Mari. And with that final comment, thank you to everyone who's joined us today on this webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists who shared so much of their insights and their own personal experiences. I look forward to meeting you all at the next webinar. If you just visit motorbusinessnetwork.com or any of our social media pages, you can find out about the next exciting webinar that might be happening soon. So thank you very much all. I look forward to an exciting distributed type of working approach moving more into the future.
Thank you, Peter.
A great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.